Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for the segment, we have Scott Nations, President of Nations Indexes, to discuss trends in VOLQ. We're also going to take a look at how the bigger constituents of the Nasdaq-100 are really what's driving things behind the scene here. Scott, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks so much, Jill.
And the Nasdaq-100, along with the other major averages, have certainly made a comeback since our 52-week lows that we saw in June. But it's really the constituents that are driving the movements in the Nasdaq-100.
It's really fascinating, Jill. I mean, the Nasdaq-100 index itself is down about 18.5% from its recent 52-week high. And, given where we were not that long ago, you're probably thinking that's not that bad. But, you can also look at something like Apple, which is down just 5.5% from its 52-week high. And you think, what is the story with the broader index? And then you have to look at the average name in the index. It's down almost 26%. And 9 of the names are down 60% from their 52-week high. So, Jill, what does this tell us? It tells us the value of indexing, right? Rather than trying to pick and choose, let's just replicate the index. And we're not going to have to worry so much about stock picking. We can worry about some bigger macro issues. And I think that that's really the key here. So many portfolios are starting to look just like the Nasdaq-100 now. And so let's focus on the index rather than trying to pick stocks and maybe end up in a situation where we underperform substantially.
And let's take a look at VOLQ futures. And now that we have months of options listed, anything that you could tell in the past 3 months, now that we have VOLQ futures listed and 3 months of options listed, what can you see from that?
That's right. Since we talked last time, market makers have added 2 additional expiration months in both the futures and the options. So there are 3 months in the futures, 3 months in the options. What that means is that almost regardless of what your time frame can be, you can find a strategy in VOLQ futures and options. It's about 23.35 right now. That's below 24, which is the first time we've seen that since April. It's been down nonstop since the second week in June, when the market seems to have convincingly put in a bottom. So this is really interesting. It's still at 24. VOLQ is still above its historical average, which is really odd given that it's August. But because it's August, because we don't expect much volatility between now and the end of the month, there are lots of strategies that people could use. Selling put spreads in VOLQ options or selling call spreads. We would always do that with some sort of defined risk, and that is what you get when you sell a spread. But selling a spread like that generally takes advantage of the fact that we would expect let's say less volatility between now and the end of the month. And so that's a really interesting way to take advantage of a dependable, seasonable activity.
And speaking of seasonality, typically we see volatility start to pick up more towards, the end of Q3 into Q4.
That's right. Everybody knows that October often has some really unfortunate stretches for the market. And so while I expect very little volatility between now and, say, Labor Day, after that is when things really get interesting. And Jill, it's really going to be interesting if we see the Fed continue to be hawkish. What if they get even more hawkish? Because inflation, while slightly better during the last reading, is still, it'd be tough to say anything but slightly better than out of control. And so if the Fed is hawkish, then that is really going to be tough for stocks in the last, say, 4 months of the year.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to mention also October tends to be the thick of earnings seasons into November. And of course, we have a midterm election as well. So there are definitely plenty of macro reasons to see a little bit of volatility fire up here.
And so plenty of reasons to hedge a portfolio, and VOLQ futures and options are a great way to do that.
All right, Scott, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.